My name is John Klar. I think I've managed to greet just about everyone personally on the way in, so I'll get you on the way out. And you know, I think, who I am, and that I'm running for governor for the state of Vermont. And some of you, I've talked a little bit about my past before. There have been questions about my voting history. I think we'll open that up to questions if that concerns people. We discussed me just giving some prefatory comments and then maybe discuss what's important to you. Because I actually really like that, kind of like can everybody hear me all right?
Yeah.
And I won't sing. I've always preferred talking on the phone to typing, especially Facebook. I just find I get in disagreements with people sometimes when I'm absolutely meaning to say something civil, and pretty soon they're threatening to poison my dog. So, no, really, we all know, and it's sad, and we actually know that there are algorithms on Facebook that feed that. So I think as a culture, we have to get away with that, from that, and that's why actually I'd start with that prefatory remark. I think we're largely conservatives here, but anybody's welcome. And I'm going to have to walk into rooms where I'm maybe the only conservative. But part of what we're trying to do is say that Vermont could be the first in the nation, or lead the nation, where we have civil disagreement and try to find common ground. And in fact, at one announcement recently, I used the term purple. And some people said, we're not purple, you need to stand for red. Well, what I said in that announcement was related to the three top issues that we have, that we'll talk about. The economy, schools, and opioids. We need to be purple. And many times, and I think this is just becoming a deterioration in our culture, many times we're on the same side as other people. We just differ as how we propose to get there. And if we can start with that common thing that we do want a better economy, we do want a cleaner environment, we do want our kids in good schools, and have mutual respect, then maybe we can find, compromise seems to be a bad word, maybe we can get purple. You know, I was a criminal defense attorney for years, and you don't have the luxury of that kind of misunderstanding or toxicity. If we're all trying to help people off of opioids, for instance, because that's our third issue, and I'm a recovery coach and I work with people. I've had 3 people contact me this week, and I'll digress here a little bit. You tell me if you want me to stop, but 3 people whose children are addicted to Suboxone or street opioids. One is a person I've known for 20 years, and she wrote to me from up in the kingdom in Barton, and she said, my daughter is addicted to opioids, and the judge won't do anything, and she has 4 of my grandchildren with her. And another fellow 2 days later, I think, saw our video on opioids and communicated to me and sent me an email about his daughter who died last year after a long struggle with opioids, with 4 children that she had. Bless you, sir. And I actually, on the second one, my wife heard me bawling in the other room, so I am human. Part of why I've been working as a recovery coach and became one is because I realized that with my background that maybe I could do more than just a one-on-one. Because I do one-on-one with people as a recovery coach. It's not counseling. That's something separate. It's just simply to give people the support to get back in society. If we don't, they're going to fall through the cracks, and it becomes another repeat cycle. And not just their children, but their parents. And I've just had to look into too many parents' eyes who have lost their child, including some of my family members, and one of my family members, and actually the first of my many Vermont cousins was buried 2 years ago, and I gave the eulogy at his funeral. He was 49 years old, and he had struggled with pain for years. He'd been in a motorcycle accident. He had serious injuries. So we have to get past that. I use that as an example. So let me just start with saying where we are and what we are, because I already started with other stuff. We're called the Ag Republicans, to clarify things, because we needed to have a name for a list of policies which we propose to take to Vermonters in this hopefully civil effort. And we needed to distinguish ourselves from Phil Scott, and we needed to have all of our candidates. We have some Ag Republicans here. I won't announce them maybe, but I do actually want to give credit to Tyler Ballard from Castleton for organizing this, if I could do so, and then we can all... Thank you very much, Tyler. And Tyler has agreed to and arranged with the school to be an intern for me. And so I get a free laborer. And I like that. And I think he's going to enjoy that. He doesn't know what he's in for yet. I consider it a two-way street. I will be taking him to events. When I had my law practice, I actually was an intern myself as an undergrad in the University of Connecticut. And I went on years later After traveling abroad and being an international tax attorney in England for a year and a half, I came back. I ended up being a partner with that guy after several years of associate position. And then I took on, over a course of years, 4 interns as an attorney. And I'm proud to say I could use them as references now. They have done very well in life. So we have high plans and expectations of you. And I believe I've found another intern in Middlebury. So he is the one conservative in Middlebury. We'll see if he's brave enough. And we joke, but it's kind of sad, because some of us, I mean, I actually grew up a classic liberal, they say, I believed in freedom of speech, the liberal series of cases that came out of the Supreme Court, which are the law of our land, and it just seems that, without pointing fingers, that something is different, that you could be a classic liberal and stay where you are, and you're now a conservative, I think. So I didn't mean it as a slight. So the Ag Republicans needed to have something to distinguish ourselves, but moreover, the Ag Republicans are about all agreeing on a specific list of issues. We've prioritized, really, our top 3 issues are our platform. It builds on the Republican platform. It's not in conflict with the Republican platform. But the Republican platform doesn't state policies. And we believe that Vermonters want 2 things. They want to know what you're going to do, and they want to trust that you're going to do it. And this has been something I've actually suffered for my whole life. Okay? I have been so disappointed by so many politicians at the federal level and otherwise, and I've been disappointed by our current governor. I voted for him twice, that's why I'm here. And I'm not here to be attacking him, but I may discuss policies that I propose that I don't think that he is proposing for our economy, particularly, and for our schools. So the Ag Republicans are all of us going in one direction. To paraphrase C.S. Lewis, if you send a fleet of ships out, and they all go to different ways at sea, then they don't arrive at the same port. And this is a problem that conservatives have in this state. Anybody notice that the progressive/Democrats are very well organized in their fleet? And they know where they're going. And we don't agree where they're going. And we'll talk about that a little bit, perhaps in response to questions or in summary. Our 3 big issues are, number 1, the economy. Fiscal conservatism. It's not a bad thing. We have some serious problems in this state with money. And we have some legislators that seem to think that we have infinite resources and infinite tax, people can bear this. I talk to a lot of people, and some people tell me, I'm leaving the state because I can't afford the taxes. But do you know I meet other people that say, and I say, what are your taxes? They say, oh, $6 grand a year, but that's not bad. For a lot of people, that's a lot. And I meet people who have farmland or farms that they've had for multiple generations, as my family does, and their tax bill is $10,000 a year in current use. So they call it land poor. Literally, the taxes exceed the carrying capacity to earn the economic ability of that land to pay for itself. If I gave you 100 acres clear-cut recently in the kingdom or someplace in a woodland, and you held it for 30 years, you wouldn't be able to harvest enough wood to pay for what you paid. So why carry land? It used to be something you invested in. And literally, you can't even invest it and get a capital return. Because if you start adding up your taxes, let alone if you're carrying insurance on a building. So number 1 issue is economics. That also includes restricting or paring back Act 250, not eliminating it, but bringing it back to the contours of its original intention. It's become such a tentacled monster of itself that it is destroying businesses. We talk to business owners. It includes looking at the healthcare costs. All this is in number 1, by the way. But they all have to do with fiscal responsibility. Healthcare costs in Vermont are the 4th highest in the country. And we're not exactly the richest state in the country. With recent bureaucratic expansion in Green Mountain Care and One Care Vermont, that is a lot of money being spent. As I wrote an article about this, $19.2 million spent in the last year just on administration expenses. And I talk to people, and I've been involved in the healthcare industry, and I'll tell you, it's not coming down in services. It's in salaries for people in bureaucracy who say they're going to fix everything. And I went to a presentation last week with Tom Pelham. Some of you may know of him. He's written a lot on Vermont Digger. I thought he'd be a good resource, but he gets $106,000 a year now to be on Green Mountain Care Board with the other board members to plug for One Care, which is now looking for something like $4.3 million extra and won't disclose all of its financial information. But what he said was, we won't know for 5 years if it's working. Okay, we laugh, but that, you know, so our motto is, what is it? Farms close, bureaucracy grows. I better get it right. So if we look at the numbers, don't liberals and conservatives want good health care? Don't liberals and conservatives want good schools? Because when we get to schools, we have the 4th highest per pupil costs in the nation for schools. And it's going up, as we just saw. Despite Act 46 and consolidation, which is a nightmare for some small schools. It's not one size fits all, by the way. We now have proficiency-based learning. Maybe we need proficiency-based school responses. Some schools are small and doing very well, rural. You close them, why would anybody come move to this state to go live in that community? The school for many areas, and I know for some of you, is kind of the last anchor left. And when you're busing children an hour each way to school, which is happening, Rochester and some other towns, there are other costs here, not just environmental costs of a bus, but to the children. For a while, I went to a school that was overcrowded, and it was 50 minutes each way on the bus. I mean, you could learn a new language in that time if they had audio books back then. So, once again, though, if you look at those costs, now, I wrote an article about this, and I did this. I took the state's numbers, I took the federal numbers, and in fact, Vermont's median income is about $57,000. And Washington, D.C., which has the highest per capita, per pupil costs, is $101,000 median income. So if you were to take our costs, and as the numerator, the college students are here, right? Sorry, I'm being respectful, not making fun of you. For us old folks that don't do math, welcome. And the denominator was instead median income. Not just, we're number 1. We're the most expensive place in the country to put your kids in school. We have the 4th highest welfare benefits in the country, the equivalent of $42,000 a year. I'm totally supportive of welfare for people that need it to transition. But I don't think there's much going on to eliminate abuse and fraud. And guess how I know that? Go ask anybody who earns 10 or 11 bucks an hour if they know somebody that's committing welfare fraud. I haven't met somebody, and I talked to a lot of those people, and they get upset because they're working. So, you know, it's a moral hazard, and it doesn't help people in the end. And if you raise the minimum wage, it might be well-intentioned. But any study of economics shows that that causes inflation, and it hurts the very people that you're saying you're trying to help. And a lot of that is going on. And when we've got a whole fleet of ships on the other side running for gun rights, to take away our gun rights, guess what? A declining economy increases suicide in young people. It increases despair. It increases domestic conflict and thus domestic abuse. And it will lead to shooters, I suppose, in our state, God forbid. Those are the things that are causing the increases of the violence that we are now told the response is to take away guns from lawful gun owners like my wife and daughter, who want to defend themselves. The more guns they take away, it's not really changing this problem. We have to look at economics. Likewise, the environment. You can spend $53 million, as they will this year, on Lake Champlain. But when you totally destroy your economy, we're not going to have any money to fix our environment. This is true in the Amazon, it's true in China. We have to treat our finite resources environmentally with respect and stewardship and not treat them like they're infinite. We have to do the same thing with our dollars. We are squeezing the people in the middle, who are the taxpayers who bear this. And this government right now actually believes, many of them, that when they hire more people at $120,000 a year, that they're stimulating the economy. And you might laugh about that, but no, they really do. Dave Zuckerman really does believe that. Now, great, he believes that. So I'm not going to attack him as an evil person for doing something that is not in accordance with basic math, okay? But you get Capone with the bookkeeper. Hopefully you show people, this isn't going to help. Somebody's got to pay this money back. The 3-acre rule in Rutland, need I say, $300 million. And there are constitutional issues here as well if you impose those kind of costs on businesses. And we have a constitution for this reason. So if you look in those first list of issues, I've just suggested that they all come together under fiscal conservatism. We own that issue. Pensions is actually one of the biggest ones, and I mentioned it because we have a potential teacher here. And our pensions have been so underfunded for so long, and I don't care who we blame for it, we need to fix it. And I can tell you, I researched that, and just to give you a number, they have been reporting that number at $4.5 billion, a shortfall. That's a lot of money for this little state. You couldn't issue bonds for that without going through a democratic process. They've done it simply by promising and not delivering. Promising to teachers and promising to state workers, who both work often for lower wages, in the hope that they will have that security. Just like some people serve in the military for 20 years for the pension. You know, you didn't get up every morning at 4:30 a.m. to reveille so that you would, just for fun, did you? Oh, did you? I did, because my father was a Marine, and I heard that when I was like 3. I love him, but that's trauma. I didn't get paid. So, you know, when we look at the pensions, to give you the numbers, because I had Bill Huff look at this for me, he's a certified financial planner. They say it's $4.5 billion, and the more I dug, I have a background as a tax attorney, as I mentioned, and boy, not a lawyer. We need a lawyer in there, okay? We need somebody to say, wait, this is unconstitutional, you know, on these gun bills. On the Global Warming Solution Act. Hello, are there limits on government? You're literally going to give them carte blanche to do whatever they want. And if you look at tax policy, you'll find out the carbon tax and all of that is not actually going to help the environment. It's going to grow government and grow those businesses that benefit from it. But I'll come back to that. On the pensions, $4.5 billion. So in order to come up with that number, they took money that they have set aside for the pensions, because they've been robbing it to balance the budget and other things for years. And then they kept tweaking it, little accounting gimmicks. So they came up with, it's going to be $4.5 billion if the money they've invested earns 7.3 to 8% for the next 30 years. All right? And many liberals are hoping that the national economy will tank because of you-know-who.
Right.
Okay? And I'm not about you-know-who. I'm about the issues that affect us. You-know-who, Orange Man Bad, is not going to fix the Vermont pensions. We have to. And if we make our whole election about that, we're losing respect for both sides. We're not fixing the problems that really we need to address. So if you take that number, and I said to Bill Huff, and I said, what if the economy goes down? By the way, we've had the longest running market run in US history. We have just pumped a huge amount of money into the economy through the tax plan, where everyone thinks of that. That money, better for worse, it's complex. Yes, it pumped up the economy. Yes, there's a hangover coming. And yes, something like 80 or 90% of economists predicts it's going to be within the next year or two. But the Democrats want it to be before the election so they can win. And the Republicans want it to be after the election so they can win. But it's coming. And we laugh, but what happens to Vermont's pensions when you don't earn 7.3% a year on your investments? And you divest from fossil fuels for moral reasons, and you earn less for your teachers. Who is gambling with our teachers' futures? The guys driving snow plows right now, they make 12 bucks an hour. They're alarmed. They want to get paid. Our firemen, a lot of those people are liberal. Probably most of the state workers and teachers are liberal. And conservatives, we are making it a mandate. Is that not true?
What does liberal mean?
Well, tell me, that's a good chat. They want their pensions paid too. I would say that...
What are you talking about, liberal?
Yeah, well, you can use another term if you want. The left, would that be okay? Left and right, conservative, liberal,
Okay.
Republican, Democrat. Democrats, when I say liberals, I'm including Democrats and progressives.
Democrats are liberal?
Traditionally, that was a term used when I took politics.
Even the ones that are funded by corporate money?
Well, so again, that's
They're
another,
liberal?
so they might be a liberal who are on the take, but when I was taking political science, that's the stratum, and then you have, anarchy on the far left and totalitarianism on the far right. So I'm trying to be descriptive. And
Here's an anecdote, whether this makes sense to you or not, or even think of it as being relevant.
Yes, John, please.
In Australia,
Yes, sir.
the Liberal Party is the Conservative Party opposite the Labour Party.
Yes.
So when you say liberal, because you're talking about the conflation of liberalism and socialism, as some people might believe, or liberalism in the classical sense, of which the Constitution is based on.
Well, I think more people these days are equating it to the liberalism of Bernie Sanders and progressivism, and I think a lot of people in this room would take that meaning to be what I'm referring to. And so, forgive me if I'm speaking in generalizations, but I'll use the left or the right. But getting back to the pensions, because I do get off track, I asked Bill Huff, what is the real number? And he said, for every 1% the state income on investments drops from the 7.3 or 8%, for every 1% lower return, it adds $600 million to the $4.5 billion figure. So if you drop down to 0, you're going to add it's $9 billion. Now on the other side, they have underestimated the future costs of those pensions, particularly healthcare costs, which are going up phenomenally. So if you actually use those numbers, and then if you had a national decline where you could lose 5% on your investments, if you looked at the fact that if we decline with our demographics, I believe we were the only state last year in the country to have our credit rating downgraded. And what that means is your cost of borrowing goes up. What that means, you're in a vicious cycle. And Vermonters entered the Great Depression without debt and with a lot of farms, 20, 30,000 farms. Now we have 690 dairy farms. They're all too big, I'm told. Because for decades, my family and others would say in farming, get big or get out. Now you're too big, get out. Whatever you want to call it, getting all of our food trucked from 3,500 miles away in California, which is where most of our food comes. Whether or not it says organic on it, I try to buy organic when it's on sale and turning green usually, but it's very organic then. You get rhizomes, you get fungus thing, and you get a lot of nutrients. It's not green, it's not sustainable. And if you have a carbon tax, and if you have inflation caused by artificially inflated wages, like a socialist enterprise over well-intentioned, and you have these costs go up, they layer up. They layer up in all the costs of food production and in the trucking. You with me? So you'll suddenly have a spike in food inflation. And we've taken our food for granted for too long. Cheap food is one of the reasons we've abandoned farms in Vermont, why it's not productive. The other reason is, I raise sheep, and I can tell you right now, I can't pay my tax bill with sheep. That's why I sold my farm some years ago. One of the reasons was, let them come make the square bills. You know, I can't make enough, but you can in other places. 74% of the lamb in this country comes from Australia. Flown, refrigerated, no equipment for pollution control on the jets. Why is it coming from Australia, grass-fed lamb, to Vermont? There's something profoundly wrong with that. And I don't care if you're liberal or conservative or socialist or Australian. I lived in England for years, sir, by the way. Liberal over there is like in the middle, okay? They got like 82 parties, you know. So we're trying to come together because the nation is fighting over one person. And if anybody is going to come together, I would hope it would be Vermonters. And that people wouldn't be just jumping on labels. The second big issue, and so coming, you know, it's actually finance, they're all connected, is the schools. And I've talked about those costs and what some of the solutions are. We're going to be coming out with a plan. I've been working with Dave Kelly and others. And you know what? It's not a one-size-fits-all. But we have fewer students, same number of superintendents, same number of teachers. It's not in the teachers' interest to be ultimately thrown against the taxpayers to pay them, you know, either in their pensions or otherwise. And I'm very acutely aware, because I was raised around a lot of teachers and respect them, that they're being asked to do things that most of us cannot imagine when we were in school. They have some serious problems in their midst, compounded by the opioid crisis, a declining economy, which is putting children in harm's way. They're coming in anxious. Active shooter alerts, actually, as I wrote in a recent article, studies show that traumatizes children as much as actively having been in one. I asked a woman recently that didn't know. I said, ask your grandson if they're doing that. And she said, I couldn't believe it. He came home, he's 8 years old, and he said, yeah, Mom, yeah, Grandma, they're teaching us when they come in, you get a pen and you hide under the desk, and then if they come up, you stab them in the eye. You're traumatizing children. You're traumatizing by telling them the climate's going to collapse. Okay, maybe it is. That's one study, and we don't know with certainty of that. But let's talk about reducing pollution, not carbon, which is not a pollutant. If we were to do things that implemented policy, and if you ask people to do it, rather than try to create a government to impose it on you to save the world, there's something very fishy about that. And I'm very green. I've lived off-grid till recently. I hate buying oil. And I've been that way my whole life. I was raised to be very frugal because I was raised largely by my Vermont grandmother, Cesarine Stoddard, who was one of the last teachers in the state to have a one-room schoolhouse and raised 6 kids through the Great Depression. And she was frugal. We don't say cheap, we say frugal. Because we need to be frugal. We're a frugal state, and we're abandoning those traditional values for this spendthrift. The world's going to end soon, so let's just spend the money. Before the world ends in 11 years, we will have a financial collapse. That is a real thing. Well, no, it's terrifying. Because in 1920, well, we may not, but that is a more real risk. Yes, John?
Donald Trump is cutting regulations to beat the ban. and this massive tax cut is stimulating the economy, why are we looking at the possibility of a financial collapse?
Because we're at 106.4% of GDP, and if you study economics by any measure, we're redlining, okay?
But the tax
Whoever
cuts
did
are
it,
supposed to fix all that.
okay, but it didn't. And both sides have run up the debt. I've seen it my whole life. I was formed in this way partly under Ronald Reagan and the S&L crisis. Some here remember that. And actually, and I was actually just a slight little digression here. So I was working as an intern and I learned how to do title searches. I'll go out and do a title search. So I look and I'm like, they bought this house in 1984 for $60,000. And now it's 1987 and they're selling it for $110,000. If you were to project that, that means that this is going to be $1 million house in 5 years. You know, I did quantitative analysis and stuff that I now have Tyler to do for me instead. And I thought, you know, my common sense was, this isn't sustainable, but I didn't question because all the grown-ups knew. Then it collapsed. And 6 years later, I'm working as an attorney doing foreclosures on properties that I'm selling at foreclosure that had $400,000 mortgages on them. I'm selling them for $7,000 to $10,000. There were also environmental regs coming in at that time that also made people not want to touch them. Superfund, RECRA, CERCLA, and that stuff. I've seen it. And actually, the big reason I sold my farm in Barton in 04, 05 was because I said to my wife, I said, they're issuing hundreds of billions of dollars of loans to people with no income. And that is going to end poorly. And everybody says, no, oh yeah, we saw that coming. No, the day before Lehman Brothers collapsed, 95 out of 100 stockbrokers said buy. Buy something. You don't trust the people that are going to benefit no matter whether it goes up or down, they win. They didn't see it coming because they were so busy making money. That was about $7 to $8 trillion in debt that was rolled by the Obama administration through Wall Street bailouts, AIG and all that, into our pockets. They took the bad tranches of mortgages and they bought them out. That's called quantitative easing. It's a scam. And it doesn't matter, you're right, whether you're liberal. Actually, the liberals today are the rich ones. You know, they're the Hillary Clinton rich people. According to Thomas Frank, who's a liberal writer,
quantitative easing, just to make a point, came from the Federal Reserve.
It did.
That's where it came from.
And you know what? I talked to some of the top economists I could mention to you, and they don't quite fully understand it either or what it's going to do. What is negative interest rates? And getting back to your question, there's a reason why America can have 106.4% GDP. It's because the whole world loves our dollar.
And if they have to trade in oil.
That's correct, petrodollars. And the day that shifts, because there are some entities that wish to, it's already shifting. So we've kind of been sitting on our laurels, Americans. We have a lot of personal debt, a lot of consumer debt, a lot of credit card debt. I went yesterday with my wife to get a gift for our grandson to TJ Maxx. And they said, you want to get a TJ Maxx card? It's 10% off. And my wife said, well, I'll wait till I get a bigger purchase. And I said to him, is it all purchases? Yeah. I said, so you pay a penalty with cash. You pay a penalty. Remember the old days? You get a discount for cash. There's something very wrong about all of us living in debt, and Vermonters should know this, whether you're born here or not. We get in trouble with this. I'm a flatlander. My mother moved to Connecticut before I was born, just before. So I was growing and thriving in the Vermont mountains until, plop, birth defect. It's not where you're born, it's what your values are. Okay, and we need to come together on that. In fact, that idea, well, I've had people saying just recently, well, you're not born here, I'm not going to vote for you. I'm like, you know, there are a lot of people born here that are flatlanders, okay, to use that term. T.J. Donovan's one. Zuckerman wasn't born here. Phil Scott, I don't really see serving us with those values that I was taught, and I'm not out to bash him, but we've got plans. I've got people working on some stuff. Dairy is in big trouble. It's just been a losing proposition for decades to pump up dairy. It's actually socialism to try to control the economy by having government subsidize businesses. And it thwarts people from putting their money where they should. Now, we're meanwhile not meeting the out-of-state demand for Vermont products, for lamb, for pork, for value-added products, because you can make beef jerky. We've got some growth there, not all whiskey. But frankly, having very high property taxes disproportionately hurts farms. Because farms, you can run a multi-million-dollar business on 2 acres with a building. But you can't run a multi-million-dollar farm. But farmers are putting, we hear about the cost of pollution and how there's these externalized costs. It's very true. But farmers have externalized benefits. They keep the views open. Cows, not their farts, cows produce soil and compensate for soil erosion. Cows eat grass, which is solar energy produced food. And there's an issue, not just of food quality, the locavore movement, the things that we can benefit from, local food that's fresher, that's more quality, that supports our own businesses. There's an issue of food security. Because when we shift to getting cheap pork, and you have 30,000 sows breeding in one facility in Virginia, aside from taking manure that would be an asset and turning it into a toxic dump, okay? People fall into these things. They get overcome with the fumes and die in these things. That's, when there's a flood, they flood rivers and kill 2 billion fish. That's industrialism, that's not food. But now you have a collapse in Vermont, God forbid, which could be just simply hyperinflation, and it comes if you print too much money. Where are your pigs? Dave's got some. They're gone. There used to be pigs everywhere. There used to be farms everywhere. It's, oh no, now if you can't make money, just get out. We'll develop some housing with it. That is a dangerous folly. And someday we're going to look back and say, wow, that was stupid. Yes, sir. I think we should take questions now. Our three issues: economy, schools, opioids. I think I've hit on them. Thanks.
And I read your thing, John, about the agriculture things you just mentioned, and I'm still trying to struggle with how you make that pay. How can you get a lot of people growing pigs and sheep and cattle and make that pay? Because I just don't see the economics in it. I mean, it's for some people, but I don't know that that's gonna really stimulate our economy here in Vermont.
Well,
I don't see how it does.
Well, first of all, you know, you could say I don't see how you're going to save children from despair too, but we're going to try. The quick answer is, there's never a quick answer with me. There's a lot we can do right now through government, low cost, to help existing farmers, because Vermont has always had a problem reaching markets. You know, originally we had the market in Boston in the 1800s because we brought cheese and butter, but we couldn't bring milk because it wouldn't make it. They used to have turkey drives, you know. Tens of thousands of turkeys. They would walk them all the way to Boston to sell them. Anybody study this? They're all the way from the kingdom. And it's funny because when dusk falls, sorry, but it's just cute. I just love this trivia. When dusk falls, guess what turkeys do? They roost. And if you weren't in the right place, they would roost on a barn and it would collapse. Imagine that. So we lost our connection to those markets. We can do a lot. We still have those same geographic problems. And when the railroads opened up out west, that's when our milk went out the window. You know, merino wool peaked at $1 a pound in 1852. And answer to your question, we can't afford not to have farms. We do so at our peril. So one, we can help facilitate, and we're working on some plans right now, we're going to be unveiling this, to have tax benefits. Particularly, we want to try a pilot program in the Northeast Kingdom, which is depressed after EB5. They've been left, okay? That's where I've been for 20 years. I love the kingdom. So I don't have to give them $1 million. But maybe I just let them keep some of their own money. Now, one of the ideas I have that we're trying to mature is, you get a tax credit for your pigs, not you, because you're not in the kingdom. So I'm going to pretend you're in the kingdom, sorry to pick on you. So you get a tax credit of, say, up to $10,000, $1 for dollar credit for the food you produce and sell, okay? Dollar for dollar, you don't have to make a profit. You might spend 10 grand on expenses, but you on your gross sales against your taxes. Even if even if you're selling it to your neighbor, now that would be an incentive. If we helped through government, which right now does almost nothing for other than dairy, if we help people who are already in production to get their products to market, some statewide marketing, some statewide distribution. And all I can tell you is I'm excited to have some really great people at the table right now, and we're meeting regularly so that we can unveil an idea to do this. There is a market there already, and I'll tell you what. And Wendell Berry, if you haven't heard of him, he's a wonderful writer. He's kind of a liberal, but I would invoke him. He's kind of liberal on some issues, and we could go into that, sir. But he's not an extremist. He's been writing about the environment since the 60s, since before the Rockefellers funded the TCI to save us through government expansion, to charge us money so we can pollute more, okay? We now mow an area of lawns in this country larger than the state of Texas. We burn some 600 million gallons a year in lawnmowers. We spill like 13 million gallons on the ground. Is that as valid as him using fuel to till ground and raise food? But this TCI doesn't distinguish between those kinds of uses. And the person who's wealthy and can afford to drive a Hummer is going to. And the guy that's poor, and like me, and driving a truck with 300,000 miles on it, until it died a couple weeks ago, but it's still moving hay. Because I try to do that. I try to be frugal. I get a kick out of it if I can get, 60 quarter wood moved in a $600 pickup. That's environmentally good. Cash to clunkers was a disaster. So you're right, we need some creative ideas, but you know what? You say to me, I don't see how you do it. We're like 1% farming production now. 1% of our economy is bureaucracy at the State House, at the bloated drone. You want to talk about, well, I don't see how that's sustainable is my answer to you. We're putting an awful lot of money into bureaucrats. 500 of them are earning over $100,000 a year. And Vermonters don't earn that much money. Uh-oh. Walt, you go first.
That's all right.
Ladies first.
Well, your point about things being sustainable or not being sustainable, I experienced a very sad day just recently, last week. Black River played Poultney, boys basketball. It was one of the last games that Black River High School is ever going to have with boys sports. Their school is closing, and their boys sports team gathered together a group of guys to play. They told me that they were considered a gold town. They had 2 supervisory unions, one closed down, and that superintendent went away, and 2 assistants popped up. So saving nothing, we have families that, what I see, because I'm around the sports area a lot in high schools, what I see is our communities are suffering, and our kids are going to suffer because they have no community. And when you take away our schools, when you close our schools, you close down their connection to community, which fosters their depression, which fosters suicide rates. We're destroying Vermont. What do you say that you're going to do to help foster that community and help foster our schools, which will increase and help everything?
So you just asked me pretty much the hardest question anybody could ask me. Thank you.
Sure.
And I'll try to answer it.
Okay.
When I was an attorney, if I had an immigration issue, that's very complex, so I referred it to an immigration attorney. And when I had a patent issue, I sought out a very specialized patent attorney. When I learned to make hay, I talked to people that had made square bales. I didn't go tell them I was going to do it. In answer to your question, to pretend that there's one fell swoop that we can fix all these problems would be a lie. To attack 46 purely without having a proposed alternative would be a lie. For years, I've regarded this issue, because it's actually kind of like farming. Trying to get goods to market isn't much different from trying to get kids to school over big mountains. The geographical problems that we have that are also what's so beautiful about our state, for hunters that climb them, it's great exercise. But so it's not a one-size-fits-all. And I used to say for years, John McClowery is a writer of policy for Ethan Allen's Institute, and I'd read his articles and I'd be like, God bless him, let him deal with Act 46. For years, I haven't even invested my brain. I didn't know the answer. But if I'm going to be your governor, and if I'm going to put together a crew of people to deal with this, then we have to have a plan to replace Act 46. And I can tell you that I'm working with some great people. So here are some examples. And I talk to people about schools all the time. They closed Chelsea, where my cousins all went, and where I grew up a lot with my cousins. And it's a sad thing when those schools, the Blue Devils, I think they were, the Red Devils, some kind of devils. And it's tragic, but it's not. Some schools, I just talked to my cousin this morning who's in North Hero. And I said, what do you think about Act 46? He said, well, we actually supported it initially. And now they're bringing kids in from Isle of Vermont, and it's not really going very well. And we have this new principal, and I don't want to badmouth, but the point is, they know how to fix their school. I attended the Act 46 hearings before the Supreme Court a couple weeks ago in Middlebury, where Dave Kelly did a great job arguing about this issue. And as I listened, I could hear some schools were doing perfectly well. They had stellar accomplishments for their children. They were relatively small, and they didn't cost a lot of money. And they got soaked up into larger districts because guess what? The larger district, it was cheaper. Or some schools get saddled. Some communities who have been very frugal and fiscally responsible are being now combined with other school districts that just spent money like crazy. South Burlington is spending $83 million this year as a budget. This must be DC. that's a lot of money, and maybe they have it. And by the way, I'm not bashing on Chittenden. We need to integrate our state and not have this back and forth. Chittenden wants farms too. Chittenden wants to have some pigs locally and not coming from Virginia or China. You know, Smithfield Foods is now owned by China. China owns more than 60% of the US pork products. Why? Because there's money in food. And Monsanto's known it, and they have artificially tried to get rid of farmers for 60 years because they know, all right? And that's an answer as well, Art. When there's inflation, guess who's going to be positioned to do well? Farmers. Because when you take all your land, and this is Wendell Berry and why I mentioned it, and you convert it over to the highest monetary value, then you end up with big houses that burn a lot of fuel with cathedral ceilings, you know, and they're huge, and everybody's got 3.2 cars, and isn't this great? And then all of a sudden one day you go, where's our food? Well, it's not in suburbia. It's not around Boston. And if Vermont loses all of its land, either to returning to forests or development, where's our food coming? We will be missing a great opportunity. They're always going to need food. And if the price of fuel goes up, which it naturally could without any taxes, then we benefit because we're close to Boston. It will actually benefit us to be selling food because right now, trucking and fuel costs are historically quite low. I mean, it was $3.50 a gallon for gas in '05, all right, and higher at other times. So right now it's relatively low relative to Europe, where it's $6, $8 a gallon. Vermonters, when that price goes up, we're going to be sitting there going, wow, I could have had a profitable V8. But my land's gone, I've been taxed so much, the people that had the knowledge of how to raise things and work are gone because they fled to Florida or Tennessee or Texas, where the taxes are very much lower. We have one of the highest costs of living in the country. And we have a legislature that's liberal or left-wing that's about to add more layers of taxes, more costs in the best of intentions perhaps to help people. But sometimes, this is what a tax attorney knows, you can have unforeseen consequences that you didn't want come out, squeezing out the sides when you start trying to influence people. Yes, sir?
Sort of answering what my question was, but...
Oh, good. Next question. Sorry, Walt.
Okay,
Go ahead.
so, probably speaking to the choir here, but the carbon tax, which they're trying to push like all hell, that's obviously going to devastate everybody. But I keep wondering about Vermont's farms. Last time I knew, farmers don't use electric tractors or electric trucks or blah, blah, blah. They're, you know, it's all gasoline based. Now, all you guys are running on, are basically operating on the slimmest of margins as it is.
Negative. Many are eating into equity.
Is it going to destroy, I mean, literally destroy Vermont agricultural industry, this carbon tax?
No, because we're going to stop it. But anyway, go ahead. Again, amen.
Oh, you know, you got the Zuckerman and all that, who are hell on forcing these things down our throats for our good, for our very own good.
Dave
I
Zuckerman
keep wondering about the agriculture.
is a faux farmer. I'm sorry, I've met
I
him.
know.
We farmers have been, we call him dishpan hands Dave, because he doesn't, and I've talked to people, he hires workers, you know. I don't have money to hire workers, I have rough hands and don't wear gloves, not to boast, but farmers can't afford that. And farmers, that's why, but in Dave's case, he is farming government, okay? You mentioned him. Let's get on a deeper level, because it's not just farms, because in truth, it's a very small percentage of our current state domestic product is farms. Of course, that's only because 80% of it is state bureaucracy. You know, farming might be 20% if you took out that, you know, when you start using numbers. Nobody denies that the carbon tax is regressive. Okay, this is basic tax policy, right? Does everybody know what I mean by regressive? So if you earn $2,000 a year, or 20 grand a year, and you have to pay $1,000 in taxes, that's what, 5% of your income, whatever that is. But if you earn 100 grand, that's 1% of your income. So that's regressive. So they've talked with the Essex plan in other ways that, well, they're going to compensate that, they're going to collect the money, they're going to give it back to you in reduced electric rates. For some of us who live off-grid, we'll never see the money, it'll go out and not come back, so you're actually punishing me for living off-grid, until recently. But moreover, am I then going to, depending on how you do it, am I going to turn my meter up because I'm getting, oh, my electricity's cheaper. This is not actually how you change behavior well, so you have to wonder what their real goal is. The thing is a horrible thing for everybody, especially farmers. But it's horrible for everybody. It's horrible for the poorest people. And this is how it's going to go, by the way. You'll be hearing this in this legislative session. Oh, it's just 15 cents. gallon, it's nothing, and we'll save the world with it. Listen to Greta Thunberg.
It's not a tax.
It's not a tax, because we're gonna use it here. Well, the whole point is to incentivize. The whole point is to change your behavior, and it doesn't work. You know, for people in addiction, if you study it, if a person has a food addiction, and you increase the price of food, and now they have less money, and they feel more stressed, they're gonna eat more. A person on cigarettes who's feeling terrible because they're killing themselves slowly and secondhand smoking their kids, and you increase the rate, they feel worse because of the money, they smoke more. You know, there's a connection with habitual behaviors. Well, that's true of other things. It's true with sugar. If you study it, it's not clear that you will incentivize anything. But I can tell you one thing, 15 cents a gallon isn't really going to make people do much, and they're still going to mow their lawn every 3 days, whether it needs it or not. I don't know how they do it. You can't even see where the line is where you mow next time. So then I want to pull over and say, dude, you're going around and around. Why don't you just go get on a rowing machine? You know, why don't you get with those push mowers? You wouldn't need your heart meds anymore, right? I mean, these are conversations though, because you don't use the government to impose personal responsibility on people. It doesn't work. It never works. It doesn't work in China. It doesn't work under Pol Pot. It doesn't work in Stalin. It doesn't work here. In California, when they had the drought, they instituted water rationing, and they said, you're using too much water on your lawns. So you can't do it anymore. There's a ban. You know what? Water use went up. People were sneaking out. Uh-oh. It's called the tragedy of the commons. I better get my lawn marked before it dies. So you did the opposite. Mention tax again. What is your intention? What is the result? It could be well-intentioned and paved as the road to hell. So what are they going to do? Once they open the door to the TCI, they're going to come back and say, uh-oh, 16 cents a gallon didn't incentivize. People are still burning fuel. We need 80 cents. We need $1. Now you've compounded something that is patently regressive. No tax person, no legislator have looked at it. They've admitted this. And right now they're trying to push it through, and I don't even hear them talking about wealth redistribution now. They're just going to put it through. Are they trying to hurt the poorest of people and push them out of the state so the rich people can come up here and be gentrified? There are so many people leaving this state right now that if they all leave at once, we're going to have hundreds and hundreds of houses on the market at once, and guess who's going to come up and buy them all for pennies on the dollar, and are going to go, oh, well, it's only $6 grand a year in taxes. That's nothing compared to back in D.C. or New York or Greenwich or Jersey or wherever else. Not to bash them, let them come up here and raise some pigs. Because we need food. And we all, whether liberal or conservative or other labels we want to use, it doesn't matter. We're all human. So, sorry, was that responsive? Well, to your question about the carbon tax?
Yeah, I guess my question was more towards,
And it definitely is worse for farmers because they're all gas and diesel, unless you give them an exemption.
will it finish them off?
They're finished off. The large dairies are finished off. They're in their death row. I don't mean anything against them, but they're suffering. I know many of them. And how do they sell their property now? You know, I know a farmer has 2,000 acres in the kingdom. He's milking 1,650 cows. How's he going to sell all that at once? He's the biggest employer in town as well. You know what he does? I hear about people that want to raise the minimum wage. I understand that's well-intentioned. But one of the reasons that they need a higher wage is the cost of living is so high here. For food, for rent, our landlord-tenant laws favor tenants so much that I totally don't want bad landlords, and I've done that area of law. I wouldn't want to own a property. You know, and it's very expensive. So guess what? Rents go up. When they tried rent control out west, it failed. We know this now. You could read 100 articles. It's well-intentioned. It does the opposite because the market will rule. You know, in Soviet countries, we could say, well, or socialist countries. Let's say Venezuela. Venezuela is not a socialist country. It's a capitalist country. If the price of oil was $100 a barrel, they would be doing great. But guess what? Capitalism got them. The market dropped on oil. So we can't get away from economics by instituting well-intentioned social plans. There's always a disconnect between policy and reality, and we can't lose sight of that reality. So in the end, the farmers are in trouble because if you can imagine going to work for 12 bucks an hour is bad, imagine getting up every day and you know because of what you're getting per hundredweight in your bulk tank, you're going to lose $500 a day. And you're still paying people, whether they're migrant workers or not, which, you know, I'm not opposed to expanding legal migrant worker visas, but we need our people to work. I don't believe that we're all lazy, you know? Oh no, yes ma'am. Tough question.
This gentleman had a question.
Sorry, yes sir.
Thank you.
Jump up and yell and I'll get you. Yes sir.
Going back to our unproductive land,
Yes,
How
sir.
much more productive do you think our agricultural land and woodlands would be if the owners had no property tax?
Well, that's essentially what we're proposing, but to say just no tax would be nice again in an ideal world, but we still got to pay all the promises to our teachers. We've still got to get out of the hole we're in. So to try to incentivize that way, not making you pay more, okay? Always worry about that word incentivize. It means government trying to compel you to do something and being your moral arbiter.
Well, there are,
How about incentivize businesses by having more balance in,
there are easy alternatives for the property tax. So assuming they didn't have it, how much more productive do you think we'd be in this state?
I think that farmers, I asked that farmer I mentioned, and he's in current use, and I don't know, his taxes are probably, I don't know exactly, 40 or 50,000 at least a year in real estate taxes. So at that point, he's working for losing $500 a day or $1,000 a day or $2,000 a day, depending, because when you're only making 50 cents a hundredweight on milk profit over your cost of production, you're still making a profit. You start losing $2 a hundredweight, you got 1,650 cows, you're losing a lot of money fast. And they go deeper and deeper in debt. By the way, it's too big to fail, so the banks just keep loaning them money. In the end, it's the banks that own most of those big farms.
So if we ran our budgets on consumption taxes, so that everybody shared
Sales tax?
respectively.
You're talking about sales tax when you say?
According to their ability. Well, I'm
Yes, sir.
actually talking about the transactional tax, which has been discussed in the past, but not so much recently. He's discussing it with people now. But if you replace the property tax with that kind of tax, you get help from everybody that's not paying, including out-of-state people who spend money here and take a whole lot of our tax burden away from us.
A blended scheme might be most effective. Transactional taxes run the risk of also being regressive, correct? For the reasons stated.
To me, they're less aggressive, but.
Well, regressive just means they disproportionately impact people with low incomes. So we'd have
The
to,
guy makes $20,000, if he pays 1% to the state, he pays $200 a year. The guy with $2 million pays the same tax, percentage-wise.
so you're talking a flat tax, a flat income
Yeah,
tax.
basically.
That's what you're talking, okay.
Flat
And
financial transactions tax, which is levied on every transaction, financial transaction that takes place in the state.
Well,
And the
sorry.
216,000 people that are on welfare in the state of Vermont, the average family of four that are making $42,000 a year, they'd be paying the same as everybody else.
Yeah, if they spent it all, they'd pay $400 a year.
Well, so just to answer that for a minute, because that's the kind of thing that makes my brain kind of do a little tweak,
mine
because
too.
you're then giving it and taking it away. I was talking to my cousin this morning, who works at a hatchery, and you know what? They fine the hatchery for having phosphorus going back into the lake. And I said, let me just, wait a minute, they fine you, a state agency, so the state fines the state, okay? And that's kind of the same thing there, so that just seems like somebody's in the middle collecting 20% again, you
The
know?
state gets away with a lot, because the state owns a very large percentage of the state of Vermont, land-wise and especially woodland-wise. They pay no taxes.
Yes, that's correct, that's what
Okay,
happens
so
when
all
bureaucracy grows and
all of
owns
the money
everything.
that they take in grows
Yes.
the bureaucracy, not the economy.
Yes, sir.
And if you released the public that owned the land and farms and woodlands from that same burden, we would be tremendously more productive.
So one thing you're talking about is how to shift the burden of taxes to be more equitable, but I'm saying, I don't care how much you do that, we have to reduce the expenses that we're paying.
Oh, I agree with
So
you.
I agree with that.
I agree with you.
But also, yes, Gail? Were you gonna?
Oh, you can finish, but I'm.
Sorry, but actually I wanted to come back to the question about schools, because I talked about some of the things we're trying to do. You know, for some areas, instead of saying vouchers, because voucher's a dirty word, that's rich people leaving with their students. How about income-sensitive subsidization, so it's relative to the owner? No, well, really, you could actually be sensitive, and let's get away from this rich man, poor man thing, and think about what's best for kids. What about, if we're looking at proficiency-based learning, what about combining more grades in smaller schools with fewer teachers? Like my grandmother, I met a lot of people in their 70s that had I still meet them, that had my grandmother, and they loved her and respected her, and they had like 7 grades together, and they all seemed to have done pretty well. And she also had a milk hose I've heard about the milk hose, and I was like, Grammy, she spoiled us rotten, she gave us ice cream, and she hosed them. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'm gonna give you food for thought here, and it dovetails with what Phil was saying. There's only 5 towns in the state of Vermont that pay more in town taxes than they do education taxes. In other words, over 98% of all towns in this state pay more for education.
Yes.
At least 50% more or more. We're sitting here in the town of Castleton right now. In the town of Castleton, this past calendar year paid almost 79% of their property taxes for education. So that leaves their select board to have to be able to fund $21 on 100 that they take in. Incidentally, if you go back to when Act 60 took place and what it cost the town of Castleton at that time, today they have raised, there's over 300% increase since that was enacted. And I'm coming before you to request, and incidentally, in addition to this town is part of the school district that's looking at a $60 million bond for education.
Right. Yeah.
So just think what that's gonna do. And I'm coming before you today to ask you, what are you going to do if you become governor to repeal the property tax for education and replace it for another vehicle, hopefully similar to what Phil's saying? Phil could give you a lot of information when he ran for governor, and they laughed at him. I don't think most people are gonna laugh at him today, because it's a great idea, but I'm here to listen to you. I'll support you, but we need your support. And we've got homeowners up the kazoo here that are frankly, we won't be able to live here. And our grandkids, God forbid, and whatever. And that's what it's all about.
I think I heard, and I don't want to quote it.
Yeah, I
for sure.
think you did, but
No, I think I heard that 27,000 students left our school system last year. I
Yeah.
think that was in the,
Yeah,
I want to check that because it's hard for me to get my brain around.
Well,
That is a
Governor
whole-
Stott talked in his State of the State
Yes.
about affordability, and he admitted that property taxes were a huge issue. Well, I don't see any plan coming from him. I don't see anything coming from him or any study that still isn't going to put it to the property tax people. And why should we be, and this incidentally includes second homes,
Yep.
and why should we be the whipping boy for education? It isn't fair, it isn't right. And if you want to talk about stimulating the economy, just think what that would do for people that want to buy a home. Just think what it would do for construction, for plumbers, for carpenters. You talk about stimulating the economy, and we would automatically be competing against New Hampshire.
So, if I can, I
Marshall.
should have given him the microphone, but thank you very much.
Well, I
But
wanted to
you've
bring it
also
up
asked
because
a
it's on
question, you
here.
want to know what I'm going to do about it, so I'm going to tell you that I don't pretend to have all the answers. I didn't learn how to make hay in a day either, and I'm not going to lie to you. This is a complex problem, don't blame me for making it. But I'll tell you one thing, the fleet on the other side, whether we call them liberals or whatever you want to call them, the progressives, the very organized fleet, have no intention of repealing Act 46. Rebecca Holcomb drafted it. T.J. Donovan wants to go to D.C. and be a rich guy in a couple of years when he challenges Leahy. We are at least trying. We're listening, number one. Number two, I've floated some of the ideas. I could mention some names. I'm meeting with some good people, including Dave Kelly. I wrote to him, you know who Dave Kelly is. I said, Dave, what can we do? Because reducing taxes is not an answer if you don't reduce the cost. You're just going to have it squeeze out another place. We have to, I'll put it this way, our school system, I believe it's about 32% of our total state budget right now. Okay? That is a crisis that the other fleet are going out to sea, and they're all going to sink us. Okay? It is all hands on deck. The pensions are a crisis. The health care costs are a crisis. Not because I'm being an alarmist. The alarmists are doing active school shooter drills. The alarmists are talking about Greta Thunberg to shove these other things into our laps. We have a financial problem. So, we need to get creative ideas. We need to get, I believe, more local control, more teacher feedback. Because this, again, I mentioned the teachers. Teachers are dealing with children that are coming in with serious problems because of the drug problems, because of the poor, declining families, declining economies. I talk to them and it's shocking, okay? It's scary. So teachers can show us how to do this, but one thing I mentioned was if you're gonna do proficiency-based learning, you're already combining some grades, combine some more grades. Some schools might do very well with the old one-room schoolhouse model. It might be the only way to do it. The only alternative is to put them all in a one-room bus, right? And industrialized for decades. We've been treating schools kind of, and children kind of like we treat farms. And that cheaper is better. Cheaper is not better. So it is not a one-size-fits-all. It is not a quick, but by the Lord, we have to work on that because that's number one right there as far as that, and the pensions. The pensions is a big one, but nobody really brings it to the fore because it's been kicked down, it's being lied about, okay? The costs are not really being looked at. Yet, who? You guys fight it out. Arm wrestle. Yes, Gail. Gail's next. John, thank you. Gail is assertive. Thank you, Gail. Yes.
So, let's circle back to Act 250
Yes.
and all the businesses that have left this state over the last 25 years that are not paying taxes, that there's children that, you know, the CEOs, the workers, all those people that work here in assorted towns across the state are gone. Their tax money is gone.
Mm-hmm.
When I moved here years ago from Connecticut,
How
Rutland
dare you.
was booming. Rutland was
So did I.
booming. There was not one empty storefront. There was
Bennington.
businesses.
Yeah.
There were factories, there was 4 GE plants, there was Metro Mail, I could go on forever. And when I moved here, I thought Rutland was nothing from where I came from. And now, we're waiting for the tumbleweeds to come down Center Street Hill.
And Rutland's doing better than many
There
towns.
is nothing here. There's
Yeah.
no more mall, there's no more stores, there's hardly any restaurants, there's nothing. So my question is, to fix this, we have to fix Act 250, or no one, no business wants to even step foot in this town or state. And that is hurting everyone. I think that's one of the #1 problems.
I agree.
So how do
Next
you
question.
fix that?
So, how do you fix that? Well, because it was a statement and not a
Well,
question.
I'm sorry.
And it was
So
a
how
combo.
do you
No,
fix
good for you
that?
because and we've mentioned it and
It's
it's right up there on a #1 of the platform. And so some people say, well, what do you do for farms? They don't matter. Well, farms do matter because they're our culture and people like farms. And the reason I said for food security and all the things, the view, the tourism and everything. But if you really, they're putting new regs in on Act 250 on farms, or they were this year. And I think, frankly, it's some of my bell ringing that's made them say they're going to put it on hold because I've been making a big stink about it. Oh, well,
But I want to talk about industry. I want
I'm
to
with
talk
you. I'm
other
answering.
than farming.
yes, but what I'm answering
Okay.
is, if we reduce restrictions for regs on farms, and in general, we'll be doing it for other businesses as well. It's not exclusive to farms.
Okay.
And we don't necessarily want to throw the doors open and have them build another, a $40 trillion J-Peak, in the middle of nowhere without any, regulatory oversight. It's an example of regulatory overreach. If you're running a business, just a second, that was a long question, give me a second, Terry. If you're running a business.
I want to add to that.
Okay, well, oh gosh, I'll give you the mic. So, if you're running a business, then you want your business to grow. And when you have to grow your business, you have to look at cost of goods sold, and you have to look at sales, and you have to look at expanding sales. You either reduce costs or you expand sales, right? When you're running a business in the government, whether it's local, state, or federal, you don't have to worry about that. You just grow business. And if my business is to inspect your factory, then guess what? I'm going to find more stuff wrong, and I'm going to pass some more regs, because then I need more people, and then I get to be a manager. It's parasitic. Not necessarily intentional. They believe what they're doing is legitimate. But there's a point where cost-benefit isn't there. And this government will spend $100 to get a nickel. And I mentioned before, the old adage for Vermonters is, plan for the worst and hope for the best. And right now, our legislature are planning for the best on pensions while hoping for the worst for Donald Trump and the economy. Okay, it's the opposite of our value system. We all know what I'm talking about. They are making unrealistic expectations. So if you were to encourage business simply by removing some of those regulations and the bureaucratic costs, so you're actually reducing costs as well. You clean up welfare without punishing anybody, but there is no effort to stop welfare fraud right now. There is no effort really on a grand scale to limit government. When I say to people sometimes, common Vermonters, regular family, they go, well, you can't do that, Johnny. Because government only grows bigger. The best you can do is hold the line. No, we're the taxpayers. If you let it keep growing bigger, you fail. And you mentioned Phil Scott. I will mention that he doesn't have economic plans. When we announced our candidates at the State House, some of you were there, I said I'd heard about these polls that asked what people thought about giving a tax break to people under 26. No income tax. Anybody hear about that? They were calling people up. And I announced, and I didn't know who it was, but I suspected it was a Phil Scott thing, because he has this dream team in there of $10,000 payments to people to come live here. That's going to give us millions of dollars. It still stands behind it, okay? That's not economics, that's bureaucratics, okay? And that's all they got, and they've spent their whole plans. So I heard about this, and actually I know some people got that call, and I said, that's absurd. So when we were on the State House, I announced, I've heard about this, and that's absurd, and it's ageism, because people are on fixed incomes. Elderly people are on fixed incomes. What about them? So a week and a half later, a week ago Thursday, Phil Scott's administration announced their plan to give a tax break to everybody under 26. Man, am I clever. Sorry. And I sent an email that night to Joe Benning. I said, Senator Benning, he's an attorney. I said, have you considered the constitutionality under the Equal Protection Clause of giving a tax break to a group of people at the expense of the elderly people that we say are our big problem? Next day, pulled the whole plan. That's the extent of his economic plans for us. Okay, and what I'm saying is we have economic plans, and we are putting together a dream team of really smart people, and they're coming forward, and we need more, by the way. Yes?
In reply, and
Sorry,
what
Terry, you
I
gotta
see
wait.
you doing,
Wait.
John, is the definition of an insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a
Yes.
different result.
There you
We
go.
need to explain to people in our communities that voting these people in are the ones who are creating these policies that are killing our farms. What we saw in Middletown Springs, we had an election where they wanted to have a bond of a couple $1 million to create this big, huge town hall and all this stuff. We had one farmer in our town that everybody respected that bought signs for us to put in our yards to say, vote no. And because of the respect that this community, that Vermonters have for farmers, we put those signs in our yard and we voted no. And what we're seeing is we had more people come out to vote, and they vote against the progressive ideals, and they said no more. We are not doing this anymore. And then on top of that, like you, we had people like Sally Aki, who is going to run in our town as an agri-Republican, and she has the ideals, and she's on part of your team. And so get people in your communities to do what Sally is doing and what you are doing, and run and take these people out of the question. We need to not keep promoting insanity of voting these same people over and over again. Respect.
Are you remember? We need to put that in a bottle and give everybody a swig, Finally, people are going to want to leave, by the way. I do have sign-up sheets so I can get on the ballot. You can always vote against me later if you want. But that's the American way. I got some Bernie supporters that supported that, or signed that. They snarled at me and then they signed it. Classic liberals. No, then we had a chat. I talked to them. Sorry, Terry? Or
Well, Maury and I are
Maureen?
brothers, and I know
Yes,
what
sir.
he's gonna say, so.
Yes, sir.
You think you do?
I do.
I think that we need to understand, first of all, that Vermonters and Americans in general never vote in their own self-interest. We get distracted and we go off on tangents, we don't pay any attention to what's going on. And it seems like in order to get any of these things to work, what you really have to do is have a plan that restores a sense of community and a sense of personal responsibility.
Well, we're trying.
And, okay, well, I mean, I'm
That's
just
my
making
dismay
the point.
sometimes, is that seems to be out the
Okay,
window. But go ahead,
and
Mark.
another thing, you know, and this is all can easily be documented, but people don't understand how long this has been in the works. I've got an eidetic memory, which can be a real problem because I can't forget anything. I also read upside down. It was a really handy thing when I was in trouble with the
I need
principal.
you in my administration.
I could go
Some
in
of
and
this
read
stuff
what was
looks
on the
upside
desk
down when it
before
comes
they
into
told me
this.
about it, right? I had my alibi before I even knew why I was there. But,
Careful what you wish for.
okay? In 1964, I was 14 years old, and the Rand Corporation put out a survey about the conflict between a cohesive society and a rugged individualist personality. Basically said that the plan was to eliminate, that was a useful ideal and an iconic image of America, but it wasn't going to work in the future. And there were plans at that point in time to relegate, and I'll never forget the phrase, relegate people with those opinions into the position of being quaint anachronisms. No conflict, nobody mad, nobody coming after you, laughing at you like you laugh at a UFO viewer or whatever. That can't work, that'll never happen. Jump ahead to the 70s, and there was a long series of articles in the Village Voice about how a certain group of people could take over an entire state. I call them trustafarians.
Zuckerman's.
Okay? Well, they started on New
Mr.
Hampshire,
Paul
and if you
Wallace,
look
we
into
call him.
to the short-term history of it, it failed in New Hampshire. And they moved here.
Yeah.
Now, the Vermont attitude has always been to mind our own business and to let our neighbors
And
do
it's
what they
hurting us.
wanted to do, and they were smart. These people are clever. They turned that around and used it against us. But in a very short amount of time, there weren't any Vermonters in the Vermont legislature. There was a guy in the town I grew up with, his name was Tate Maher. Everybody hated him. Lived on my street, used to holler at all the kids that went by. But my mother said he was great. So one day he was hollering at me, and I said, my mother says you're not a bad guy. And he says, oh yeah, we'll come up here. So I sat on the porch with the guy, and I asked him why everybody hated him. He said, I go to all the town meetings, and I'm against no matter what they want. I said, why do you do that? He says, because half these pricks don't even know what they're voting for. He said, and I make them argue. And he said, and I have my facts lined up. And he said, you know what?
He sounds like me.
Okay? At least half the time they changed their mind and decided they didn't want to do it. So here was a guy that nobody liked, but everyone respected. And, and this is my image of Vermont politics, and it's just not there. And in a quick regard, and I'll stop, to the opioid epidemic and the problem with welfare, and I've said this before, the problem with eliminating welfare fraud is that every single one of us has a close friend, a family member, or someone we know who's doing it. And in order to put a stop to it, that's going to cause an awful lot of turmoil. When you start writing letters about your sister-in-law, and how else are you going to do it? Because there isn't any other way to do it. It goes back again to the personal responsibility. You have to start somewhere, and it's not going to be
Well, you're
simple.
also inviting people to come here who are not from here for those benefits.
Well, of course we
But I
are.
actually don't know anybody, personally, I can say I don't know
Why
anybody
would
that's
you
on the
not
record.
want to be
I
a
do know
junkie
people
in
who do.
Vermont? Your Suboxone is free.
Yep.
You show up at welfare and you get an EBT card you can change for cash. They find housing for you. If you OD, they send someone to save your life.
And
Why
fly
would
you.
you not want to be
They'll
a
fly
junkie?
you. So what, okay, so you've thrown a lot into, you're as bad as Gail works.
But I
So
got
let
one
me-
more thing to say. This whole
You said that
program
3
with the
things ago.
Suboxone,
Go
well, I
ahead.
have a lot to say, okay?
Forgive me.
That's all right.
Real levity.
We're maintaining a Suboxone program so that our daughters and our wives aren't getting mugged on the street and so that our houses aren't getting broken into.
But property crimes are going up.
Oh, yeah, but let's face the reality of it. It takes a lot of money to be a junkie. And if we don't provide the dope, they're going to steal it somewhere. So the behind-the-scenes problem with this whole program is that is driving it. People in law enforcement totally understand that.
Yeah, I talked with them. But it's not as simple.
I'm done.
So, yeah, thank you. So I'm going to try to
See, I told you.
respond to all that. No, I love it. I love it. And so quickly, actually, I'll start at the beginning and come to the end. I've actually got articles out there. I'll give you out my cards too. Maybe somebody could distribute these. Tyler, you work for me now? No, Tyler's busy. If you could distribute these, there's a website we set up with my articles on. I put about 7 new articles yesterday on johnklar.net, just so the writing is separate. And one actually paraphrases some quotes from Wendell Berry about personal responsibility. Another recent piece we did that Dave put up is called The State of Modern Society. We are abdicating personal responsibility and expecting the government to do it for us. And Wendell actually talks in his essay about whether we're doing that because government's taking it from us or because we're abdicating. We're just lazy. We're giving it up. So I've written about it, and you're right. And one of the things that bothered me about running were 2 things. One, we don't have a free media in this state. I've known it for years. They're all liberals. They totally slant everything. As a writer, I found out with Vermont Digger, who I've recently filed a claim with the IRS for violating their 501c3 status, because I had nothing to lose. They were deplatforming us. They were attacking me for Brooke Page's 2-year-old comments about Christine Hallquist that I never even heard about, and they do a whole big spiel against me and the Ag Republicans. But 2 weeks before, when I called on Governor Scott to stand with Governor Sununu against the TCI, they wouldn't give me a quote while they used 6-month-old quotes from him and got quotes from Anthony Paulina and Rebecca Holcomb and deplatformed me. And when I complain, they won't put my comments up. How do you have a free press? But the other reason I didn't know whether I should run is whether enough Vermonters would get off their duffs and get involved. They sit back, they play video games, drugs or no drugs, they just don't want to bother. And it's not necessarily just they want to be left alone, it's they just don't want to have to get their brains around it. The world has become complex. I can tell you as a lawyer, in 30 years, there are a lot more laws. 1,200 and some new bills this year. Let's repeal a couple thousand, okay? They don't even know the bills they have. You're going to idle cars for 10 minutes and give somebody a ticket, even though the police said don't. It's all virtue signaling. Look, I got a bill. I moved to Vermont 2 years ago, and now I'm in a rep, and I got this great bill. Sorry, I get a little carried away. I'm a comedian. But I mean, I'm like, do you think about the, because this, Maury, is about what's called, the guy on the porch, it's called critical thinking.
Yeah, I know.
And I wrote an article just this last week on American Thinker called Indoctrination Education. What I explained was when I was in 8th grade, they divided the school in half, their class in half, and they said, we're doing capital punishment. This guy's up on death row. You write an article about why it's good to kill him, you write an article about why it's bad, and then we get together and we talk about this critical thinking. And also you learn to respect the people you disagree with. We live in a culture now where we go, all of you in the room, get down, hide under your chairs, there's a shooter here. Let's go out and lay in the street for the environment. There is no critical thinking. And you know how you can find that out is when you talk to liberals. When you talk to people who believe this stuff and you say to them, you're mad about the environment, I understand. Where does your food come from? 3,500 miles away. And the San Joaquin Valley is sinking at the rate of 2 feet a year because of all the water being pumped out of the ground. It's an environmental disaster waiting to happen, and you're at the State House complaining against big dairy industry, who, are not, they're kind of the victims of these regulations. They are losing money, and there aren't that many of them left. So who's going to...
They're not big compared to the rest of the country.
Correct. I've been to 8,000 cow facilities. They're not. I wrote that in my article. They're not actually. I wrote an article about this, about the climate protesters being disconnected from their food and yelling, and then young people yelling at old people, hey, you old people, you polluted. We're very angry. You left us this mess. Oh, hello, child. Let's hold up a mirror. How many devices do you own? How many hours a day do you spend using fossil fuels through electricity to game and play on, you game? No, I'm kidding. How much? Because if you study it, they pollute way more than us because we didn't teach them to turn down the dial. We didn't teach them to shut off all the lights. It's on us. There's no personal responsibility. So the biggest reason I was thinking is, do I believe that enough Vermonters still have a heartbeat to come out? The drug thing has shifted. In 1981, the cost of heroin on the streets was $100. All right? You robbed to get your money. Now it's $5. And some years ago, about 3 years ago, I read an article on Vermont Digger, and it said, I think it was $5 or $6 for a dose of heroin. And I just stopped. Because I was a criminal defense attorney, I was a public defender. My clients in Connecticut for years, it was the crack epidemic then. And they had hundreds of bags of heroin. And they had hundreds of crack and all this. There's money in it. The entire industry has shifted. By the way, this comes back to food, because one of the biggest causes of this, hang on, John, because he's got a 1-hour question, I got a 2-hour answer. We flooded the economy with cheap corn in Mexico. Cornification, you could call it, some authors have called it. Ethanol, oh, we're gonna save you with ethanol. We're gonna wreck your small engines, we make more money there. We're gonna wreck your health with cheap corn syrup, but we'll make more money there. We'll put you on Suboxone for life, okay? We'll make money there at state expense. 40% of our prisoners are on Suboxone. I think that some of them would like, I know, because I work in the community, there are a lot of people on methadone and Suboxone who want to get off. They hate it. They hate their dependency. Whether they got on there because of script meds or because they got on there from street meds, but it's $5 a dose. So it's 8 or 10 grand from pharmaceuticals, but on the street it's cheap. They don't have to steal for it. It's cheaper than a good bottle of Vermont beer. It's cheaper than pot. That's the reality, Maury. So they don't have to steal, but they'll die. Because
Well,
the
that's my
fentanyl and the
point.
heroin,
We made it that way.
we did, and the fentanyl and the heroin, we flooded the market in Mexico with cheap corn. It pushed millions of farmers off their land. They end up in Mexico City. They end up growing pot. They end up growing heroin. 90% of the world's heroin now comes from Mexico. And 20 years ago, it came from Asia. Most of the fentanyl in this country is coming from Mexico, about 90%. Some comes from Canada. The strong stuff comes from China. It all comes from Mexico. You can track where people are dying from the fentanyl analogs. You know what I'm talking about? There are different kinds of fentanyl. You can see which factory it came from, and it comes from the cartels. That's who moves it, and then it goes into our inner cities and up through my client base. That's the reality, and Vermonters are here like, well, so what are we gonna do? Let's get them all on it. It's a one-way Huxleyan street. Everybody know Huxley, what I'm talking about? Brave New World. Let's put them all on these drugs. It's a one-way street with no way back. And they're developing dispensing machines in Canada. They're already in trial. So you don't even have to have a human give you your Suboxone or your methadone. That is why we say compassion, and some people, have been attacked. That's what we need to have, some real solutions. And I sometimes talk to people who are on methadone and they say, help me, I want to get off. And I say, well, don't you get counseling? No, I get 15 minutes a month. It's a horrible, horrible drug to withdraw from. But the people that do quit become the ones on the front lines to help others. Yes, John?
So let's talk about solutions.
Yes?
Portugal has radically changed the way they do deal with addiction, drug addiction. Are you aware of that?
I think fill me in, because I don't know enough to be an authority, though I know in Amsterdam and other European countries. Well, as far as Portugal?
Yes.
Or as far as turning it around? I don't remember what I read about, if it was exactly Portugal, and I'm fuzzy brained, so remind me, because I do remember reading something about it recently. I think it was Portugal.
Portugal decriminalized drugs, hard
Yeah.
drugs, any drugs.
Which is what Amsterdam did too, yeah.
And they emphasize treatment.
Mhm.
And they provide resources towards said treatment. Guess what? They're having much better results.
They are.
Yes.
Right, and that's what our proposal is for
Is
the
that
agriculture.
something that you would propose for the state?
Not only am I proposing it, but if you look on our website with the business card that somebody should have put in your hand now, that's one of the proposals that we have. Our chief proposals for the opioid crisis, because Vermont actually has done a lot, and we can do more. One, provide the resources to help people get off drugs who want to. In prison is a great opportunity. So the theory goes that if you're in prison, when you get out, you're going to use street drugs. We find out you come in, you're on heroin, Dave? You be my there. So you're on heroin, and we have a doctor visit with you. So we put you on Suboxone. And you might go through a horrible detox otherwise, but you could do that. So when you get out, the idea is you won't go back to street drugs, which actually costs a lot less than the pharmaceutical. Could the pharmaceutical companies like that? But if you were to spend money on actually more volunteers, okay, we have a great recovery coach program. I try to get people to do it. If you haven't done it, do it. It'll help equip you to understand how you can help those people you know. It's not a lot. To use more citizens' personal responsibility to respond to this crisis is not only a nice idea, it's necessary. Government cannot fix this problem, and even if it could, it's so choked with the pensions and the schools and the debts and the new things. It doesn't have the money. The resources are gone. So we need more citizens involved. The people that are recovered addicts, I sit with the Governor's Opioid Coordination Council. You look around the table. The ones that are on the front lines are themselves out of that hell, and they care, and they're burning out. So we need more people. You've got to change the door from Huxley to back. Now, prisoners now maybe, because I don't pretend to have all the answers, maybe Terry's on heroin too. And Terry's in prison, and Terry says, no, I want Suboxone. To assume that people, 100% of them, will always be addicts, which is the justification used, is not borne out by the statistics. And if it's what I heard, definitely the Coordination Council has shown that prevention and recovery are the two big areas. And given what we're dealing with right now, we need more on the recovery as well. So what they've found is that a lot of people, some I've heard 20%, I think it's more than that, can get off. We're not even trying. The other thing that we're proposing to do is, we're trying to provide support services for parents statewide, using the volunteer recovery coaches that we have. It can be very affordable. We don't have $1 billion. I'm not sitting here, oh, let's spend money. We'll always be suspicious and like the guy on the porch when they want to spend money, because Vermonters need to spend less money and find solutions that are innovative, like Vermonters that are frugal and have community and compassion. Those are our watchwords. You're absolutely right, John, because that's the core of what we're doing. The other thing, we don't have a statewide plan to help pregnant women off Suboxone. I met a guy recently who now became a recovery coach after I met him, and he told me that his daughter was in recovery and had got off street drugs, and she then went back and relapsed. She'd been on Suboxone, but she went back for a street dose, and she died, and she was 8.5 months pregnant. And I just look in his face, and I just want to bawl. I don't know, I can't see it anymore. And the parents, it's eating them alive. They're haggard for months and years of watching their children suffer, and there's no statewide support for them. There are some pockets. Wouldn't take a lot of resources, John, to implement more in recovery and support. Yes, sir.
Do you see any connection to this problem in the state? The drug problem that you've been talking about here? And the fact that we don't have an equitable, universal healthcare system. Do you see any connections to people being able to access healthcare and not have to worry about paying for it, or worrying about having insurance, or worrying about this, that, and the other?
I hear you, because I'm going to the
Because
doctor Thursday, I don't know how to pay for it. But
Here's
yeah.
where I'm going with this. If we passed Act 48, if we actually funded Act 48, Act 48 was passed, signed by Shumlin, but not funded, to provide health care for everybody, which in a study done by an organization called NESRI would be a net gain for 95% of the states. Even though the taxes would be raised, everybody would have health care and it would be cheaper. What connection of what you were talking about to the fact that we don't have that?
Okay, so just let's be clear. You, with all your tough questions, are the guy I want to come to every speaking engagement so that I can learn. This is my learning curve so that I can
You
respond.
are aware of Act
Yeah, well, so, yeah,
You are
no,
aware
I'm
of that.
not ducking, I'm saying I'm literally come every time. I'm inviting the hard questions, because it allows us all to talk
Yeah.
and look at complex solutions.
What is that? What is age 48? What is 48?
Act 48.
What is it? I don't
It
know.
was
It
the,
was, okay, it was the law that brought the Green Mountain Care Board into existence that helped implement Obamacare, which sucks.
wasn't that when we spent like $60 million?
But it also
on software?
provided for, and Shumlin pulled the plug on it, provided for funding for a universal single-payer healthcare plan in Vermont, where everybody would have healthcare, everybody would pay taxes towards healthcare and not pay insurance premiums, and everybody would get healthcare.
So back,
Anyway, what
yeah,
connection, what
So,
connections are there to?
back to the beginning of your question, and you just kind of came to the end as well. As I recall, I thought it was 60. It was $70 million that was wasted on a failed computer system on that.
That was Obamacare.
Somebody milked
That was
that,
Obamacare,
but that was
not
state
the
funding.
single-payer plan.
Yeah, but that was Vermont money spent.
Right.
That was $70 million spent by, guess what? Our bureaucracy. Where did it go? Poof. So right now we're spending $19.2 million in administrative costs, which I did an article about OneCare. That's in OneCare.
Yeah.
That's not Green Mountain Care Board.
I'm not for OneCare, I'm not for the Green
Get
Mountain,
you.
for the ACA, I don't like
I'm
the ACA.
Answering your question, so
Yeah.
yeah, the ACA is again, what grows? Bureaucracy grows. Farms close, bureaucracy grows.
Well-
Bureaucracy grows, healthcare goes down.
The ACA is the subsidizing of
Yes, it is.
insurance companies.
ACA is subsidizing and also consolidates and forces healthcare providers like hospitals into a bureaucratic system that is not necessarily best for them. And our hospitals are being crushed by people coming into ERs, and they have no care for mental health illness because Brattleboro Retreat's closing. This has been a crisis since 11, at least 2011.
Yeah.
What's happening? Oh, well, we don't know. That's the kind of administration that we've had, I'm afraid to say. That's why I'm running, because we need to bring forward. We do have smart people in Vermont. I know we do. Where are they? They're not in the bloated dome. You're the smart person? Or are you asking another question? Wait, let me answer this complex question. Because we don't get quick answers to complex problems, and we live in a society where people won't read a 10-page or a 1,000-word memo. They want it in a 13-second. The way our children's brains and our own brains are neurologically changing, we even read differently. If you study it, it's scary. Guess what? The more complex it gets, the more complex the solutions. So in answer to your question, John, which I do thank you for, you asked me what I think the connection is. Well, before healthcare, which is a component, the number one cause, supposedly, of addiction is adverse childhood experiences. That is, ACEs, or crushed families, okay? If you've had 3 or 4 ACEs, you're much more likely, in fact, they would say, you are predisposed to what we used to call an addictive personality. If you've been molested, if you were horribly abused, if you were homeless, those things happen more when you have a crushed economy, okay? Marriage rates are down. Bad economy, you're more likely to have no father in the home. If you have a broken family, you're more likely to not be provided for, not protected. You're more likely to be molested, perhaps by a school teacher or some neighbor because you couldn't afford it. So guess what? So it's not as simple as healthcare, but that's a component. Another thing with healthcare is this. If I want to raise money for the Ugandan orphans that I've been working for years, and I put out a jug with a little black girl on it, I don't get much money. But if I were a fraudster, right next to it, I'd put, my dog needs cataract surgery. Our value systems stink. We got people who spend 10 grand on a credit card to keep a 14-year-old dog alive for the while. I'm a farmer, I'm sorry. I had an 18-year-old boy, Carly. I shot him myself last year because I got a bullet this big, 22. I know it sounds horrible, but we're farmers, you know. We're gonna pay $150. How much can we spend? One of my grandmothers was 91 and diagnosed with cancer, and they spent $150,000 or more on her to do a radical hysterectomy, and she lost her mind because she was too old. She spent the next 7 years,
90 years old.
and she never came back or knew who she was, and spent 6 years. Now, I don't want the one to turn on the tube on grandma, but guess what? We have to live within our limits, because we're leaving young people nothing, because we're keeping us old fogies alive till we're 120. We're certainly not working anymore.
People criticize, the same people who criticize the NHS in Britain for not giving 91-year-olds mastectomies
Well,
and other things.
I didn't say not to, but I'm saying you're asking similar questions.
Yeah.
I will say this, because I'm going somewhere. Did this get louder? Volare. Sorry. And I lived in England for years, but so I know a bit about national health. But what I would say is this. What is the price tag right now? What is the return on investment for our education? It's getting higher and higher. What is it on patients? Green Mountain Care and One Care Vermont, if you look at what they're spending right now on administration under the pretense that they're going to have more preventive care, and then you talk to people, they're not getting care.
Yeah.
They're not getting care. And the hospitals are being thrown into this one-size-fits-all like the schools. Guess who benefits? The bureaucrats. Oh, I make 150 grand a year, and I feel like I'm doing something fruitful in my little cubicle. But the old fogey veteran out there ain't getting care because I meet them. And our kids are not getting care. And so, you know, if we wait 5 years, as they're saying, before we'll know whether One Care works, you already agree with me, what do we do if it doesn't work? What do we do with the $70 million that's spent under Shumlin on a computer system that failed? And that's what bankrupted Act 48, isn't it? Wasn't that part of it?
I don't know if Act 48 was bankrupt.
Well, I think
the computer system was so that the ACA would work, the website.
They're spending it all again. And as I compare my article, in a non-prof, you don't spend that proportion on admin. You know, and I heard Star Parker speaking, she said 80% of what we spend on welfare doesn't get to the people. Okay? Yeah, right. So you're creating dependency, you're rewarding a lack of personal responsibility, and then we're wondering why everything's falling apart. And trying to appeal to personal responsibility may not be very popular, but I'm believing that people will do it. And you folks are coming forward. And by the way, we need candidates. We need people to run. You know who they are. If I win, but we don't win House and Senate, we don't do anything.
That's exactly right.
Those liberals will take over.
Can you have...
And we're going to close up, I'm told by the boss.
Can you
What does that
have,
mean? I don't know if it's
Take one,
peace.
you can take one more if you want. Just quick,
Then we're done?
as long as it's quick.
We have to quit by midnight, I'm told.
Like I say, I have class in the morning. It'll be nice to.
Responsibility without social responsibility.
Can you have personal
Can you
responsibility?
have personal responsibility without social responsibility?
No, because part of personal responsibility is caring about your neighbor and your community and other people, is it not?
Yeah.
I don't know if it's a trick question or not, but I do want you to keep coming and asking me questions. That one was easy. Shall we close on that, folks?
Yes.
I'm so grateful for you to come. Oh, the music
Give her
teacher.
a chance.
I have one question.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm from Castleton University. I'm a sophomore music education major, and I always feel like I should know more than I do about the world around me and things like that.
God bless you.
I'm from upstate New York, Albany, which is the capital. Wow, not New York City. And I just was wondering, for teachers and for all the college students here, what could you say? Because I've heard a lot of great things, but I've also heard a lot of bad things about Vermont right now, just in this meeting alone, to convince me to stay here and not go back to Albany where teachers are getting, especially where I went to school. It was really great and I had a great education. What would you say to convince me to stay here?
Please. I'd say when the cow excrement hits the fan, you're gonna get more food here in Albany. I would say that we need young people and we need to show you that we actually have some ideas and are responsive right now. That's part of what this is about. That we want to grow business and we are trying to do things to make it, to honor promises to teachers. We do have a culture and a beautiful countryside and a rural area and all the beautiful things that Albany lacks. No, Albany's okay, but Albany's a big city. And it's funny you say in upstate New York, because for me in the Kingdom, Albany's like 4 hours south. You know, I've been up to Ithaca and Clarkson, and so you know. So did you want to respond
I
as
just
well?
want to say that
And I'm so glad you say that because we're trying to make
Vermonters,
it
we need
attractive
to
for
be
you.
more inclusive, and we need to get more young people involved. And we should have asked her that if she had any questions first, because that's the next generation.
Go ahead, rebuke me. She spoke up, I give her credit. I'm not sure she wanted me to say, well, hey, oh, there's a young person, Sarah, what is your solution to the, no, but I don't want to put anybody on the spot. And she, thank you for coming forward. And
I
yeah,
can
you,
talk on Act 46 if you want.
well, will you? We're gonna close up. You're gonna get, if you want to be an intern, I need more interns.
I'm good. You're really good at putting me on the spot.
And I want to hear from young people, and that's why, you know, we have some, I talk to young people, and I've got 3 kids that are young people, and my 3 kids are not on drugs, and there, but for the grace of God, go I. Because one of my cousin's daughter is only 6 months older than my daughter, and my daughter's doing very well in college, and their daughter has been Narcaned and living on the streets. And their father said to me, I was like, I'm so sorry, I heard what happened when she overdosed. And he said, Johnny, he said, that was the first night I slept in 2 years when I knew she was in the hospital. Because they know. And I can't even relate the horror stories that parents go through when their kids that they've spent everything devoted to spin out of control and their brains change. And it's going to get worse because I talk to law enforcement as well. And there's a new drug called methamphetamine coming out of Mexico, all right? And it's cheap
It's
and
an
it's
old drug.
strong. Pardon?
In the 60s, that was the
It's
drug.
stronger now.
Yep.
Just like the pot and the other drugs. It's much stronger, it's much cheaper. That changes your brain even more, and your teeth fall out. It's not funny. You know, I'm not making, mine fell out because I couldn't afford a new bridge, but you know.
On the first day of the Blitzkrieg, 5 million doses of methamphetamine were issued in Wehrmacht. They were
We
only
need
for
creative
14
solutions
days.
to all these problems, do we not?
Yes.
We honestly and humbly want to try, and that's what the Agri-Republicans thing is. It's farmers to put our boots on and go clean up the crap in the bloated dome and pop the tick belly and make sure we get the head out, all right? So it doesn't re-infect us. Thank you very much for coming. I'm very grateful for your